The wind carried dust like an old secret across the open plains, whispering through the dry grass, rattling the fence posts, sifting into every crease of the land. It was a kind of morning where the horizon felt endless, as though the world might swallow you whole if you kept walking. And yet, a lone figure walked. A woman, black dress faded with wear, hem caked in mud, veil tugged loose by the restless air. She moved like someone carrying more than grief. She carried the weight of not being wanted anywhere else. Her name was Evelyn May Carter, though the town called her only the widow when they thought of her at all. She had left behind the little house where she once heard her husband's laugh, left behind the judgmental whispers of neighbors who clucked their tongues and pitted her in one breath, then said she ought to remarry in the next. She had gone to the town store not long before, asking after work, desperate to trade labor for food. A few men laughed outright. A woman with hard eyes told her, "This is men's work. You'd best move on." Even the children mimicked their parents, smirking as she passed. She left that place with her cheeks burning, fists clenched, and not a coin heavier. Now, with her throat dry from dust and shame, she turned her feet toward the Boone Ranch. The land stretched wide and lonely here, fences running out into distance, cattle grazing beyond. She had heard of Thomas Boone, heard that he kept to himself, never married, that he lived with quiet that unsettled townsfolk. Some called him strange. Others said he was fair, that he worked hard, that he asked nothing from anyone. That was enough for her. She stopped at the gate, steadied her breathing, and walked on. The house stood sturdy but plain, built from weathered timber, its windows staring out like tired eyes. She saw him there, broad-shouldered, leaning against the post, hat shadowing his face. His silence was steadying and unsettling all at once. She lifted her chin, though her voice trembled when it came. "Is this job for men only?" The question seemed to hang longer than it should have, as if the air itself was waiting. Boone studied her shoes first, worn near through, then her hands, blistered already from walking and carrying. Finally her eyes, steady though a little hollowed. His reply came low, unhurried, as if pulled up from some well within him. "No," he said, "it's for family." Something in her chest twisted, caught between ache and relief. Not kindness, exactly, not an invitation. More like a truth he lived by, plain as fence posts and dust. Work began that same day. She fed the chickens, though their pecking startled her at first. She hauled water, the buckets heavier than she expected, her shoulders burning before noon. She slipped once in the mud, soaked her skirt, bit her lip to keep from crying. Boone was there, silent, setting the bucket back upright. He didn't scold, didn't comfort either, just let her stand, wipe her hands, keep going. That was the rhythm of him. Presence without intrusion. The days stretched long. Sweat streaked her temples. Dust stuck to her skin. The sound of the prairie pressed in, lowing cattle, creak of windmill, the endless sigh of wind across the fields. Boone moved with an efficiency that seemed like silence made flesh. He hammered, tied, lifted, checked fences. When she faltered, he would step in, wordless, until she found her footing again. In town, people would have been watching, judging, whispering about how she bent her back and dirted her hands. Here, only the land seemed to judge her, and the land had no voice, only resistance. By dusk, the light turned copper, soft against the battered boards of the house. Boone lit a lantern on the porch, motioned her toward the spare room. The bed was small, sheets clean, though patched. She sat there, untying her boots with fingers stiff from work, listening to the quiet that filled the house. It was not the quiet of loneliness she'd known before, the quiet heavy with absence. This was a different quiet, like space left open for something to grow. In the next room, Boone sat at his table, a single candle flickering before him. He held a worn photograph in his hands, edges curled, face of a younger man staring back, the kind of face frozen forever by war. Boone didn't speak to it, didn't cry, just looked, eyes unreadable. He set it down, reached for his cup of coffee, let the silence settle again. Evelyn lay down that night with sore limbs, and ache deep inside that wasn't from work alone. Shame still clung to her, shame from the townsfolk, from failing too many times, from being seen as less than useful. But underneath it all flickered something smaller, harder to kill, a spark that said, he hadn't turned me away. The prairie wind pressed against the walls, carrying the scent of dust and wild sage. In the dark, both of them lay awake in separate rooms, carrying ghosts neither could name, and yet somehow, for the first time in a long while, neither was entirely alone. The sun had barely touched the rim of the horizon when Evelyn was already outside, the chill of morning clinging to her skin as she bent to lift the pails. The handles bit into her palms, her arms trembled with the effort, but she pressed forward across the yard. The weight pulled her shoulders down, each step measured and slow. Just as she thought her legs might give, another shadow lengthened beside hers. Boone reached for one of the buckets without a word. He carried it as though it were nothing, his step steady, his silence unbroken. She whispered, "Thank you," but he didn't reply. The sound of the water sloshing between them was all there was, and in some strange way, it was enough. That became the rhythm of their days, wordless companionship. She struggled with tasks that had never been hers before, mending a fence with raw twine cutting into her fingers, trying to calm a skittish calf, wrestling with saddles heavier than she expected. Boone never mocked, never sighed in frustration. He let her fumble, let her learn through failure. Only when she stood on the edge of breaking did he step in, offering his strength with a quiet practicality. The land was hard on her. Her hands split open with rope burns, skin cracked and raw. She wrapped them in cloth, gritted her teeth, kept going. That night, she found a pair of worn gloves left by her door. No note, no mention. Just there, waiting. She slipped them on the next morning, the leather soft with age, and felt something press against her chest that had nothing to do with protection from rope. Days bled into weeks, and though her body ached, she began to carry herself differently. Her stride no longer faltered under the stares of those in town. For every sack of feed she shouldered, for every fence post she hammered into dry earth, something inside her rose a little taller. And yet the gossip did not die. Whispers followed her whenever she went to fetch supplies. Some men chuckled, some spat in the dirt. Judith Mallory, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, stopped her outside the mercantile. "You're playing at a man's game," Judith said, voice dripping scorn. "No wife, no ranch hand. Just a burden he'll regret." Evelyn felt the sting of those words burn hotter than the noon sun. Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. She gripped the sack of flour tighter, lifted it, and walked away. Inside, though, shame rose like smoke. That night she worked later than she should have, shoveling hay long after the animals had settled, sweeping a barn that was already clean. Tears stung her eyes, mingled with dust on her cheeks. She didn't hear Boone at first, only felt his shadow stretch across the floor. "Rest," he said simply, his voice low, carrying no judgment. "Family doesn't need proving." She froze, her chest heaving, and something inside her cracked, not broken but opened. She turned her face away so he wouldn't see her tears, but his words stayed with her, quiet and heavy as the night air. Between the labor and the silence, there were moments that felt like something gentler. She discovered he was hopeless at baking when she found him one evening staring down a pan of charred biscuits. She couldn't help the laugh that escaped her, small, unpracticed, but real. Boone looked at her then, as if the sound was a rare bird he hadn't heard in years. He didn't smile fully, but his eyes softened. One stormy night, rain lashed the roof until it leaked in 3 places. Evelyn climbed onto the ladder, heart pounding at the height, determination pushing her up. Boone steadied the ladder below, his hand braced firm against the rungs. Lightning split the sky, illuminating his face as he glanced up at her, his hand reaching instinctively to her waist when she wobbled. For a moment, the thunder, the rain, the whole vast storm seemed to fall away, leaving only the closeness of 2 people holding each other steady against the world. Still, the town's disapproval pressed against him like a wall. Every trip for supplies, every stray look reminded her she didn't belong in their eyes. She carried that weight back to the ranch, burying it in work, refusing to falter where anyone could see. Boone, though, seemed immune to their judgment, or perhaps simply uninterested in it. He moved with the same quiet resolve, as if the world outside his fences held no authority over him. Sometimes, in the late evenings, she would find him sitting on the porch, pipe smoke curling into the dusk. He never asked her to sit, but when she did, he didn't move away. They would watch the horizon together. The cattle shifting in the distance, the wind rolling low through the grass. No words, no need, just the sound of the land settling into night. Evelyn began to notice things about him in these silences. The way he touched his hat when passing certain fence posts, as if in memory of someone gone. The way his gaze lingered on the photograph she sometimes glimpsed when she brought him his coffee. There were ghosts here, not only hers. The house was quiet, but not empty. It carried echoes of things left unsaid, of losses that made them who they were. As days passed, their bond was built not in declarations, but in gestures. A shared meal after long work. The gloves left by her door. His steady hand on the ladder. Her quiet laugh over burnt bread. Every act, small as it seemed, carried weight. It was not a courtship. Not yet. It was survival, side by side, softened by grace. And for Evelyn, it was enough. For the first time in years, enough to wake each morning with a purpose stronger than her shame, enough to walk the prairie without feeling the world was trying to spit her out. Boone had not asked her to prove herself, had not asked her to be less than she was. He simply let her work, let her belong, and in that belonging, something inside her began to heal. The prairie stretched wide and merciless, but within its harshness grew something fragile and persistent, like a flower breaking through cracked earth. Neither of them spoke of it, but both knew it was there, waiting, taking root in the silence between them. The night sky glowed orange before the smell of smoke reached them. Evelyn was the first to notice, standing at the porch with her hair loose from the day's work, her breath catching as she saw the horizon lit like the mouth of hell itself. A prairie fire was rolling fast, wind driving it forward, sparks leaping across the dry grass. She had heard of such things but never seen one. It moved like a living creature, unstoppable, hungry. The neighbors' riders thundered past on the road, shouting warnings as they fled. "Leave it, Boone. Save yourself," one called, his voice trailing into the dark. The fire roared behind him, devouring everything in its path. Boone stood still, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the advancing blaze. Evelyn could feel his resolve as though it were stone. He turned and began hauling buckets toward the well, moving with grim purpose. She stepped forward without thinking, her pulse thrumming in her ears. "This is my home, too," she said. Their eyes met, no time for speeches, no room for argument. He gave a small nod. That was all. They worked through the night, digging a firebreak with shovels, throwing water on the dry grass, beating at flames with soaked blankets. The heat was blistering, smoke clawing down their throats. Evelyn coughed until her chest burned, her arms trembling with exhaustion. At one point she stumbled to her knees, vision swimming. Boone was there instantly, pulling her up, his grip iron at her arm. He didn't let go until she found her footing again. The fire pressed closer, a wall of flame licking the edges of the corral. Sparks rained down like angry stars, catching in the hay. The horses screamed in panic, hooves striking the ground. Boone cursed under his breath, sprinting for the barn. Evelyn's heart froze. Going, it was madness, but she followed, lungs filling with smoke. Inside, the air was suffocating, walls glowing with heat. Boone was already driving the horses toward the open doors, shouting, waving, pushing them through the choking haze. Evelyn grabbed a rope, guiding a panicked mare out into the yard. Her body ached, each breath tore her lungs raw. But she didn't stop. Together they herded the animals, stumbling out into the open as sparks rained down around them. When the last of the horses bolted free, Boone collapsed to one knee, coughing, blackened with soot. Evelyn dropped beside him, one hand on his back, steadying him as he had steadied her. They leaned there in the ash and firelight, shoulders pressed, neither speaking, only breathing through the smoke. The hours blurred into one long fight. They carried water until their arms felt carved from stone, slapped down flames until their palms burned. The fire raged and shrieked, but slowly, painfully, it broke against a line they carved with sweat and grit. Dawn crept pale across the sky, revealing blackened fields, the ranch scarred but still standing. The fire had taken much, but not everything. Neighbors returned as the smoke lifted, reining in their horses at the sight of the ranch still upright, its fences charred but unbroken. They looked on in astonishment, whispers carrying in the morning air. Evelyn caught their stares, waiting for the sneer, the judgment she had come to expect. But there was only silence, and something closer to respect, though unspoken. Her body shook with exhaustion. Hair plastered her face with sweat and ash. Boone stood beside her, steady despite the burn marks on his shirt, his hands blackened. He looked at her then, not as someone half-capable, not as a burden, but as equal as kin. He didn't say the words, but she saw them in the way his gaze held hers. Later, after the horses were calmed, after the last flames were stamped out, they sat together at the kitchen table. Boone placed 2 plates down, one in front of her, one before himself. His voice was quiet, almost gruff, but it carried more than the words themselves. Family eats together. Evelyn lowered her head, tears stinging her eyes. Not the tears of sorrow she had wept before, but something else entirely. Relief, belonging, the ache of finally being seen not as a shadow of what she'd lost, but as someone whole again. She lifted her fork, hand trembling, and for the first time in years, the simple act of sharing a meal felt like grace. The prairie outside smoldered, blackened but alive, new shoots of green already waiting beneath the ash. The world had burned, but not broken, and so had they. Some nights are carved so deep in memory, they feel like they never leave you. That fire, that dawn, that silence after survival, it lived inside them both. In the years to come, others would forget the blaze that nearly swallowed the Boone Ranch, but Evelyn and Boone never would. It was a night they stopped living as 2 ghosts and started living as something more. And if you stood there in the hush of morning, smoke curling into the pale sky, you might have understood too. Out here, family was not written in blood, nor granted by law. It was forged in calloused hands gripping shovels, in smoke-stung eyes refusing to look away, in the stubbornness of 2 souls who would not let the fire take what little they had. And perhaps that is the only truth the prairie teaches. Sometimes, what saves us is not what we seek, but what we dare to keep.